Imagine you are the first crowned king tasked with transforming fragmented principalities into a monolithic empire. Your will is law. The church blesses every step you take, and chroniclers are ready to write into history any reason for your war. In your hands are an army, a treasury, and the power to decide who is a hero and who is the eternal enemy of the homeland. But from the reports emerges an unpleasant truth. Your best architect is building exactly the same towers in the conquered city as in your capital, and the local elites don't even think of fleeing, as if they were just waiting for a change in leadership. These walls and the calm of the nobility scream that you have not entered a foreign land, but have regained control over part of your own home. This turns your sacred war into a mundane operation within the state. One decree from you, and architecture is declared a trophy, common roots are erased, and a unified history is split into ours and the enemy's. What will you choose? To acknowledge that you have merely suppressed a rebellion in your own province, or to invent a great victory over a terrifying foreign kingdom to justify the thousands of casualties? Open any history textbook. Find the chapter on conquests. Rome conquered Carthage and leveled it to the ground. The British captured Indian cities and established garrisons. Napoleon entered capitals and changed the flags. Everywhere the same logic. The victor takes, renames, and restructures for themselves. Now find what is not in these textbooks. The year is 1552. Ivan the Terrible takes Kazan after a months-long siege, with underground mines, with an artillery assault, with huge losses on both sides. The Kazan Khanate is destroyed as a state. The city is taken. And here is what the victor does the following year. He is building, not a garrison barracks, not a watchtower. He directs his best craftsmen to build a new fortress made of white stone with high towers and fortifications that Kazan has never had before. He builds for the defeated, at his own expense, by his own state order. No textbook asks the question, why? Look, there are names, the Pskov architects whom Ivan the Terrible sent to Kazan, Ivan Shirai and Postnik Yakovlev. Remember the second one. Postnik Yakovlev is in charge of the construction of the Kazan Kremlin. The white stone towers, the entrance gates, Spasskaya and Tainitskaya, the system of fortifications on the hill above the Kazanka River. Now check one detail. Open any source about the Cathedral of St. Basil the Blessed on Red Square in Moscow. Who built it? The official answer? Postnik Yakovlev and Barma, the same person. One master, two major construction projects of the country, at the same time. One in the capital of the victor, the other in the former capital of the defeated. This doesn't add up. Understand what medieval construction looked like from the inside. The master did not sit in an office and send out blueprints. He was personally present at the site, every day. He oversaw the laying of bricks in rows and made decisions on the spot when unexpected soil was encountered or an old foundation was uncovered. He trained the crew, every morning, every hour. The transfer of technology in the 16th century occurred only in person. You stood nearby, watched, and repeated with your hands. There was no other way. Bricklaying with lime mortar requires constant supervision. If the crew mixes the lime incorrectly, cracks will appear in a year. If the bond of the courses is not laid properly, the wall will shift over time. The master cannot manage this from a distance. Letters take weeks to arrive. By the time a response to a question comes, half of the wall has already been built. two simultaneous objects in different cities are physically impossible for one master. And now, add one more constraint. The distance between Moscow and Kazan in a straight line is about 800 kilometers. In the 16th century, this would take 2 to 3 weeks of travel on a good road. During the spring thaw or autumn mud, about a month or more. A courier with a question for the master and a reply coming back means at least a month's delay. In that time, the team could lay down dozens of rows of masonry without supervision. Calculate. The construction season in the central part of Russia is approximately 180 working days a year. In winter, lime mortar does not set, so the masonry work is halted. This means that the master has 180 days in a year. If he divides them between two projects, he is present at each for 90 days. 3 months. In 3 months, without supervision, an experienced crew can lay and ruin a massive amount of work. No serious client will allow this on major state projects. Unless this is just a single government contract, one budget, one construction authority that allocates resources among different points of one state. This is not how conquerors operate. This is how builders of an empire work on their own territory. Historians usually explain this simply. The king sent the best architect to showcase power and generosity. Okay, then explain the details. Victors who display power build monuments to themselves, triumph columns, arches, victory monuments. But Postnik Yakovlev builds in Kazan the same thing he builds in Moscow. The same towers, the same brickwork, the same proportions of fortifications, the same standard. A winner does not copy his standard in a foreign city. He imposes it. These are two different things. To copy means to acknowledge this place's right to be part of a whole. Now for something important. Beneath what is today known as the Kazan Kremlin, there are layers that do not fit into the official chronology. During archaeological excavations in the 20th century, bases of significantly earlier stone structures were discovered under the foundations of the 16th century. The official version dates them to the 13th to 14th century, the time of the flourishing of the Kazan Khanate. Check one thing. Open the descriptions of these early foundations. Researchers note that part of the masonry is done using a technology that is not typical for the known Tatar construction schools of that period. It is characteristic of an earlier tradition. Which one exactly remains an open question, but it is definitely not the one that should have been left by the founders of the Khanate in the 13th century. Someone built here before them. Okay. Let's assume that beneath any medieval town there are earlier layers. That's true. Now, consider something else. Kazan in the early 16th century, according to descriptions by European diplomats and Moscow scouts, was a large trading city. Several tens of thousands of inhabitants, developed infrastructure, extensive trade routes to the east, west, and north. According to official accounts, the city was about 300 years old at the time of its capture. It grew from scratch in the steppe to sizes that astonished witnesses over the course of 3 centuries. It is possible. There were rapidly growing medieval cities. But here's what's strange. On European maps of the 15th century, Kazan is already marked as a major city. This was before the official timeline when it could have actually reached such a size. Cartographers from Western Europe knew about Kazan before it had a chance to grow. This suggests one of two things. Either the cartographers could see the future, or something significant existed at this location long before the Kazan Khanate, much earlier. Here's what makes this detail especially inconvenient. Medieval cartographers did not embark on expeditions themselves. They worked based on sources. These sources were divided into two types: merchant notes and diplomatic reports. Merchants recorded what they saw with their own eyes: actual markets, real docks, real fortress walls. Diplomats documented what they could verify: the size of the guard, the extent of the city's trade, the grain reserves in warehouses. Kazan, on the maps of the 15th century, is not a fantasy. It is a city with trade, protection, and provisions, as reported by those who have visited it. So, they saw exactly that. This means that a large city existed in this place before, according to the official version, the Kazan Khanate had the chance to build it. What exactly was there, and why it doesn't fit into the official chronology, is a question that official science prefers not to address. Remember this detail. It will come back. Keep watching. Ivan the Terrible captures Kazan in 1552. 2 years later, a full-fledged Moscow administrative system is functioning in the city. Judiciary, tax apparatus, church hierarchy. The governor is not a military commandant, but a civilian administrator in the Moscow administrative style. 2 years. Consider what this means in practice. To establish a judicial system in a new territory, one must create a registry of land ownership. Determine who among the local nobility retains their rights and who loses them. Set up a system for tax collection and appoint collectors. Build a church hierarchy from scratch. Appoint priests, define parishes, and construct churches. Decide which language the legal proceedings will be conducted in. This is a massive administrative task. In the Middle Ages, it would take decades. Astrakhan was captured 4 years after Kazan. Integration there proceeded significantly more slowly. The Siberian lands were annexed over generations. Why was Kazan taken in just 2 years? As if all of this was simply waiting. Like an archive that is taken down from the shelf and unfolded, because it has already been written. At first glance, it seems that Ivan the Terrible was a tough administrator who simply acted faster than usual. It sounds logical, until you look at the rest of his rule. There's no such speed anywhere else. In 40 years on the throne, only once did this happen, right here. Too precise, too smooth even for the simplest coincidence. Now add to this another fact that is usually not placed alongside it. During the Kazan campaign and immediately afterwards, in the correspondence preserved in Russian archives, Ivan the Terrible refers to Kazan not as a foreign city or Tatar capital. He uses terms that are applied to his own lands: return, renewal. This is not a linguistic coincidence. In the 16th century, words were chosen with precision because they determined the legal justification of power. Return means a right that was previously held and has been temporarily lost. Conquest means a new right obtained by force. These are different legal categories, and Ivan the Terrible chose the first one. Too precise for coincidence. Now enter inside the Kremlin. The monk Yakovlev has completed his work. The Annunciation Cathedral stands, Orthodox with domes and crosses. The first Orthodox church in Kazan. And nearby, just a few meters away, are the foundations of Tatar mosques. Not ruins, not filled holes, carefully preserved foundations. This is documented in the reports of archaeological expeditions from the 20th century. The materials have been uncovered in archives. The excavation plan shows that the Orthodox cathedral and the foundations of the mosques are located on the same construction site. The builders of Postnik Yakovlev carefully worked around them while laying the new cathedral. They were not demolished. They were not buried. They were simply worked around. Why? According to the official narrative, Ivan the Terrible waged a religious war against the infidels. The construction of an Orthodox cathedral on the site of a mosque symbolizes the victory of orthodoxy. This is how the campaign against Kazan is explained in textbooks. But the mosques are not destroyed. The symbol of victory is the defeated opponent. This is how religious propaganda operates in any era. If you want to proclaim, "Our faith has triumphed," you demolish their sanctuaries and build your own on the ruins. The Romans did this with pagan temples. The Spaniards in America built churches right on the foundations of Aztec pyramids. This is the universal language of religious triumph, understood by all without explanations. The ascetic Yakovlev did not do that. He walked around the foundations of the mosques. He didn't touch them. He left them underground, not as a buried enemy, but as something that should not be destroyed. This is not how one treats the symbols of a defeated faith. Now, remember the detail we discussed last time. On the helmet of the Orthodox Tsar, verses from the Quran. On coins from the 16th and 17th centuries, Cyrillic alongside Arabic text on a single piece of metal. On the armor of Russian warlords, the crescent and the double-headed eagle stand side by side as equal symbols of one authority. In the Kremlin, an Orthodox cathedral next to the foundation of a mosque, which no one has touched. This is a pattern, the same, on different materials, in different decades, in different cities. Where official history sees a war between two religions, everywhere the same picture. The symbols stand side by side. They do not destroy each other. They coexist as something self-evident. In a state where religion was a tool for unity rather than division, this is exactly how it should look. Now expand the scale. It's not just Kazan. Across the territory that European cartographers referred to as Tartary, there are buildings where Orthodox and Islamic elements coexist without signs of conflict. In Astrakhan, there is a Kremlin where Orthodox churches and Tatar neighborhoods with mosques live side by side. In Kasimov, there was a Tatar Khanate that existed within the Moscow state for more than 200 years as a vassal, without attempts at forced Christianization. The Kasimov Khans kept imams close. Orthodox czars did not object. The Kasimov Khanate is a unique case that historians prefer to overlook. It existed within the Moscow state from the mid-15th century to the end of the 17th century, over 200 years, with its own army, its own judiciary, its own taxes. For decades, Moscow czars paid salaries to the Kasimov Khans, not as tribute to the defeated, but as a salary to their officials. Meanwhile, The Kasimov Khans participated in the military campaigns of the Moscow state, not as allies, but as subordinate commanders within the same hierarchy, with their own imams, with their own mosques, inside an Orthodox state, for 200 years. This is how they pay those who are not conquerors. This is how they pay those who perform a function in the system. Too smooth. Take a photograph of the Spasskaya Tower of the Kazan Kremlin and place it next to a photograph of the Spasskaya Tower of the Moscow Kremlin. Pay attention to the proportions, the height of the tower relative to the width of the base, the shape of the crenellations at the top of the wall, the placement of the loopholes in a checkerboard pattern, and the size of the passage arch in relation to the overall height. This is not architectural influence. It is not the victor brought their style to the conquered city. This is the same project, adapted to a different terrain. One master does not accidentally create two identical buildings in two different cities. He does this when he has a single technical task, one standard, one client who needs to reproduce a recognizable element in another part of their state. Just like a large chain today builds identical buildings in different cities of the country, according to a unified corporate standard that is not explained but simply followed. The Spassky Towers are a signature element. Only whose? The simplest explanation is that the victors brought their name and their architecture to the conquered city. All right, then ask one question. Why did the conquered city receive a tower with the same name as the main tower of the capital? Spasskaya in Moscow, Spasskaya in Kazan. Not Kazan or Eastern, Spasskaya. Winners do not name the towers of the defeated after their main gates. They give them new names, in honor of victories, in honor of their saints, in honor of generals. The same name is not a trophy. It is a continuation. Look at the cards. Mercator, Ortelius, the mid-16th century. Open the maps of European cartographers from this period. Locate Kazan on them. It is there, marked as a large city. Now look at the territory it is part of, the same territory where Moscow stands. Cartographers do not draw a dividing line between Rus, horde. There is no boundary of Orthodox, Muslim. There is one vast territory with several major cities, and one name that Europeans give to it as a whole, Tartaria. Kazan is not on the edge of this territory. It is within it, like Moscow, like Astrakhan, like dozens of other cities that are today commonly regarded as either Russian or Tatar. This division does not exist on the maps of the 16th century. The most obvious explanation is that Europeans simply didn't understand where the borders were and colored everything in one hue. It sounds logical, until you remember that Mercator's cartographers worked from real sources: diplomatic reports, merchant routes, embassy dispatches. They didn't draw what they didn't know. They recorded what was conveyed to them by people who had been there. And these people did not see borders. And now, take a look at what happens to these maps in official historiography. The maps of Mercator and Ortelius marking Tartary as a single territory are deemed scientifically unreliable. Historians explain that Europeans had a poor understanding of Eastern political geography and would broadly shade large areas in one color. Okay, then ask one question. The same cartographers, Mercator, Ortelius, created maps of Western Europe that historians recognize as accurate. They were used to verify the locations of cities, borders, and waterways. If the cartographer is accurate in Europe, why does he suddenly become unreliable east of Poland? The cartographers did not have a zone of accuracy and a zone of imagination. They had sources. When a source provided accurate information, the map was accurate. When there was no source, there was a blank spot. Tartary on maps is not a blank spot. It is a thoroughly detailed territory with cities, rivers, and trade routes. So, there were sources. Take the official timeline of the conquest of Kazan and lay the facts side by side. One master builds simultaneously in Moscow and Kazan. Identical towers with the same names. The same administrative standard unfolds over 2 years. The foundations of the mosques remain untouched. Coins with bilingual inscriptions circulate throughout the territory. Cartographers do not see an internal border. Each of these facts can be explained separately. Coincidence, diplomatic flexibility, administrative genius, Eastern influence. But when these facts stand side by side, the explanations begin to contradict each other. Each requires the same assumption, that a unified system was in place here. One construction standard. One financial system where bilingual coins circulate. One administrative machine that can be deployed quickly because it already exists. One state. Change the frame. What if Ivan the Terrible's campaign against Kazan was not a conquest of a foreign state? What if it was an internal operation to change regional governance? Not Moscow against Kazan, but Moscow reclaiming the administrative center that had temporarily come under the control of another branch of power. This changes everything. Then it is clear why the master builds according to his own standard. He builds in his own state. It is clear why integration over 2 years is not integration, but a restoration of the existing order. It is clear why the foundations of the mosques have not been touched. They belong to the same civilization as the Orthodox cathedral. It is clear why Cyrillic is next to Arabic on the coins. This is not 2 languages of 2 peoples, but 2 scripts of one educated elite. Then the towers with the same names make sense. These are the marks of one state at different points of it. Many will say now, it's a beautiful version, but where are the proofs of a unified state, aside from architecture? Look at the coins. In the 16th century, coins with inscriptions in 2 languages circulated across the territory we now divide into Russia and Tatar lands. Cyrillic and Arabic text appeared on the same piece of metal. These were not translations. They were parallel inscriptions aimed at 2 distinct groups of literate people. Such coins were produced centrally, by one mint, with a single standard of weight and fineness. The monetary system is the nervous system of the state. Without a single currency, there is no unified tax. Without a unified tax, there is no single treasury. Without a single treasury, a state order, which allows one craftsman to build to a single standard in 2 cities, is impossible. Coins and towers are one system. Now pose a question that historians avoid. If Kazan is a foreign state conquered during the war, then why do the coins that circulate there after the conquest have Arabic text? The victors introduce their own currency, their own language, their own symbols. Conquerors do not mint bilingual coins for the subdued. This is expensive and requires separate infrastructure. But think broader. Bilingual coins appeared not after the capture of Kazan. They existed before it. In the territory that official history divides into Rus and Orda, coins with parallel inscriptions in Cyrillic and Arabic circulated for several generations. This is not a transitional period after the conquest. It is a well-established practice of a unified monetary system. One mint, one standard of weight and fineness, two languages, because both literate elites read the same coin. Bilingual coins are a tool for managing territory where both literacies hold equal status, where both groups of the population pay taxes into one treasury. This is not conquest. This is administration. Remember one more detail. In the Moscow state practice of the 16th century, the concept of voivode existed, a person whom the Tsar appointed to govern a province. After the conquest of Kazan, Ivan the Terrible appointed precisely a voivode, not a military commandant with extraordinary powers, not an occupation ruler, a voivode according to the standard Moscow scheme. This procedure is standard for its province, unconventional for a freshly conquered foreign state. When Britain was conquering new territories, it appointed a governor-general with military functions. Rome, upon taking new lands, assigned a proconsul with the power to execute and pardon. A peaceful civil procedure. A governor without extraordinary powers is a sign that the new authority considers this territory to be ordinary, planned, its own, too ordinary for conquest. There is one more administrative fact that does not fit into the narrative of conquest. After the capture of Kazan, a significant part of the Tatar nobility, the Murzas, Beks, and large landowners, retained their landholdings and privileges. They did not lose their property, were not expelled, and did not fall into dependency. They simply integrated into the Moscow administrative hierarchy as a regional elite. That is not how you treat the elite of a defeated state. The standard practice of any real conquest is to strip the old elite of their lands and distribute them to their own. This is the very essence of victory for those who fought. The Moscow boyars who participated in the Kazan campaign were supposed to receive the lands of the defeated Tatar feudal lords. This is the logic of any feudal war. But the Kazan nobles retained their territories. If we assume that this was indeed a real conquest, historians have an answer. Ivan the Terrible was politically flexible and preserved the local elite for the sake of stability. Okay, then explain why the Moscow nobility, who fought and anticipated rewards in land, did not raise a protest. Feudal logic demanded distribution. If there was no distribution, then there was no conquest in the feudal sense. No one took away the land that was already considered state-owned. And now another fact that is usually not mentioned alongside this. In Moscow, already in the first half of the 16th century, that is, before the campaign against Kazan, there existed a Tatar settlement, an area where Tatar merchants and service people lived, with their own customs, with their own community, before the capture of Kazan. This is not a settlement of prisoners of war after a victory. This is an established quarter with a history that began long before the year 1552. The question arises, where did an established Tatar quarter come from in the capital of the enemy several decades before the war? Each of these facts can be explained differently on their own. Together, they point in one direction. This is not a series of exceptions. This is a system. The official history is built on opposition, Rus against the Horde, Orthodoxy against Islam, Moscow against Kazan. This is the narrative taught in schools, which underpins state holidays, and explains why the year 1552 is considered a victory. But the architects of this narrative did not know one thing. What was Postnik Yakovlev building? The master did not feel as if he was entering a foreign state. He was heading to another site of the same government contract, with the same standard. He was building the same towers with the same names, because that's how the Unified Construction Authority operates. And now, the most awkward question. If this is a return and not a conquest, if Kazan was part of a single state that we see on maps under the name Tartary, then what exactly was lost? What event turned part of the unified state into a foreign khanate that needed to be fought against for several generations? When did the rupture occur? The official history does not explain this rupture, because then one would have to admit there was a rupture. Something happened in the interval between the period when Kazan was part of a whole and that moment when it became necessary to reclaim it. The clue lies within the sources themselves. The Kazan Khanate was formed in the mid-15th century. Before that, Kazan was part of the Golden Horde. And before the Golden Horde, it was part of what is marked on European maps as a singular territory without internal borders. Official history interprets the Golden Horde as a foreign conquest of Rus. But look at the maps from that same era. There is no separate Rus and separate horde. There is one territory with several administrative centers. The version that explains all these facts at once. There was no conquest of Rus by the Mongols in the sense that we are taught. There was a change in the governance structure of a unified territory, a shift in the ruling branch, a redistribution of powers among the centers. Later, this territory began to fragment into parts with different administrative centers. The campaign of Ivan the Terrible against Kazan was an attempt to regain control over one of these centers. Internal power operation for the change of regional management, not the conquest of a foreign state. Therefore, Postnik Yakovlev built according to a single standard. Thus, the integration took 2 years. As a result, the foundations of the mosques remained untouched. Consequently, the 2 languages on the coins are equal in status. Hence, the towers bear the same names in 2 cities simultaneously. Look at how this event has been rewritten. Step 1. The internal operation was called the conquest of a foreign state. This created a narrative of the victory of orthodoxy over Islam and justified new borders. Step 2. The unified architectural school was divided into Russian and Tatar, even though one master built according to one standard. Step 3. The foundations of the mosques next to the Orthodox cathedral were declared ruins of a defeated culture, although they were intentionally bypassed, leaving them untouched. Step 4. Bilingual coins were removed from circulation. Most of them have settled in the storage of museums, where they are seen by no one except for authorized specialists. Step 5. The maps of Mercator and Ortelius, which show one territory without internal borders, were assigned the status of inaccurate, as if Europeans had a poor understanding of Eastern geography. However, it was based on these very maps that merchants charted trade routes and did not get lost. Why all this? Divided peoples are easier to control. If an Orthodox and a Muslim see themselves as eternal enemies, they do not seek what unites them. They do not look at the Spassky towers of 2 cities and think, this is one hand. They do not ask why their ancestors used the same purse for money. A religious conflict is a convenient tool for shifting attention from the question of, what have we lost, to the question of, who is our enemy? Look at the result. The Kazan Kremlin was built, and it stands. Postnik Yakovlev did his work diligently. The white stone towers have withstood 5 centuries. The Spasskaya Tower stands over the Kazanka even now. Next to it is the restored Kul Sharif Mosque, erected in the 21st century as a symbol of Tatar identity. And no one notices that both, the Orthodox cathedral and the mosque, stand on the territory of the same Kremlin, just as they always have, as ordained by the master who did not believe that they contradicted each other. But here is something that requires separate attention. The Kazan Kremlin survived. Meanwhile, across the rest of the territory, which European cartographers referred to by a single name, something else was happening during the same period. Certain buildings were methodically dismantled. Certain structures were blown up. Certain foundations were buried several meters deep in soil. Selectively, by some principle that we cannot decipher at first glance today. Not everything was destroyed indiscriminately. They left some things while erasing others. The Kazan Kremlin still stands, but hundreds of buildings that were in the same area at that time can today be found nowhere, even in ruins. There is one more detail that doesn't fit into the standard explanation. When buildings are destroyed in the course of war or fire, traces remain. Charred bricks, burned beams, a layer of ash in the soil. Destruction leaves a mark, which can be read during excavations centuries later. But in several locations where large structures are marked on 17th century maps, there are no signs of destruction during 20th century excavations. There are only filled-in foundations, systematically, methodically. As if someone disassembled the buildings brick by brick, removed the material, and filled in the site. Not destroyed, removed. It's a completely different action. Destruction is quick. Dismantling is labor and resources. Why spend effort and resources on something that can simply be burned? This means that it was important for someone not just to destroy the building, but to remove it in such a way that there would be no question left. What stood here? And here's what troubles me. The Kazan Kremlin was left standing. This means it wasn't deemed dangerous. But those other structures were. How were they different? The answer to this question changes everything we think about the architecture of that period. But that's a different story.